Let me ask you something simple but quietly haunting. When was the last time you actually asked someone for help? Not hinted at it, not mentioned you were struggling in passing, but genuinely, directly asked another person to show up for you, the way you do for others without hesitation. Now think about how many times this year you've carried something heavy, physically or emotionally, because asking felt harder than enduring. You told yourself you'd figure it out. You said you didn't want to bother anyone. You said you were fine. But were you really? Because underneath that self-reliance, underneath that quiet strength, there's often a silent story. People who never ask for help aren't superhuman, emotionless, or invincible. In fact, often they're the most emotionally attuned ones, the ones who learned early that their needs made others uncomfortable, that asking was a burden, that it was safer to suffer alone than risk rejection wrapped in reassurance. Psychologically, the inability to ask for help is a window into attachment. It reveals how you learned to relate to others when you were most vulnerable, and how comfortable you are believing that care will actually arrive. When someone says, "I don't need help," what they're often saying is, "I've learned not to rely on anyone." But sometimes what they mean is, "I tried once and it hurt too much." There's a difference between independence and isolation, and the refusal to ask for help has a strange way of showing us which one we've been living in. Some people genuinely thrive in autonomy, not out of fear but out of confidence. They've built skills, systems, and resilience. To them, solving problems alone feels empowering, not lonely. They've learned that strength isn't about never falling, it's about knowing they can get back up. But for others, the story is different. For them, not asking for help is quietly compulsive. They might carry crushing stress, not because they want to, but because of memory. Maybe asking once meant being ignored. Or maybe they witnessed a parent struggle and learned that needing anything was shameful. So instead of saying, "I can't do this alone," they say, "I've got it." It's survival disguised as strength, and that's where the psychology gets fascinating because it tells us how identity forms. When we learn early that our needs are inconvenient, the brain rewrites the narrative. It's called self-sufficiency as a trauma response. You stop reaching out not because you're capable, but because you've been trained to believe you're alone anyway. You teach yourself that asking is weak. And while that might sound empowering, it's actually exhausting, a constant performance of being unbreakable. The brain begins to associate vulnerability with danger when vulnerability has historically led to disappointment. But here's the twist. Over time, that same self-reliance quietly becomes a prison. The person who once protected themselves by needing nothing becomes isolated by their own competence. You start walking through your own life like an island, visible but unreachable, capable but untouchable. Think about how many people smile and say, "Oh, I'm fine, I can handle it." But later they collapse in private, crying alone in the car, venting to no one, Googling solutions at 2 a.m. because asking a friend felt impossible. We all do it, even the strongest ones, because strength that refuses softness eventually cracks under its own weight. Psychologists call this counterdependency. It's when you've swung so far toward independence that connection feels threatening, and it often develops in people who at some point learned that emotional needs were rejected, minimized, or punished, that it was easier to need nothing than to be disappointed again. So when you meet someone who never asks for help, don't assume they have it all together. Sometimes they've just made peace with carrying everything. They've traded vulnerability for control, but control has a cost. Because underneath the calm surface of "I've got it" lies an emotional truth. We all need support, not constantly, not desperately, but genuinely. There's something deeply human about needing others. It's not weakness, it's biology. We are wired for interdependence. The myth of the self-made person is just that, a myth. And yet many people spend their entire lives trying to live up to it. They carry groceries in one trip even when their arms are shaking. They solve problems at work without asking a single clarifying question. They nod and say they're fine when their chest feels like it's caving in. It's because asking for help for many isn't just about the task, It's about what it represents. Admitting you can't do something alone feels like admitting failure, like you're not enough, like you've somehow disappointed the version of yourself that's supposed to have everything under control. That's the silent psychological trap most people overlook. For some, refusing help is their way of maintaining identity. If I ask, they think, then I'm not the strong one anymore. There's also something deeply relational about this pattern. In childhood, many people who struggle to ask for help were the ones others leaned on. They became the emotional support, the problem solver, the stable one. And while that role gave them purpose, it also gave them a script. Your job is to give, not to need. You're the helper, not the helped. And over time, that script becomes identity. You don't even realize you've internalized it until you find yourself choking on the words, "Can you help me?" like they're made of glass. Because here's what happens beneath the surface. When you grow up being needed, your mind internalizes a message. Your value is in what you provide. You learn that love is conditional on your usefulness. You become the person everyone calls when things fall apart, but you're not sure who to call when you're the one breaking. And over time, asking for help starts to feel like betrayal, not of others, but of yourself. You're not even sure what you'd say if someone offered. It feels foreign, maybe even uncomfortable. But the truth is that discomfort with receiving isn't strength. It's relational fatigue. Deep down, many of these people still long for someone to see through the facade, but not in the obvious way. They don't want to be rescued. They want to be known. They want someone to notice they're struggling without them having to announce it. Because that's the paradox of hyper-independence. The more you pride yourself on needing no one, the lonelier you become. So asking for help becomes a theoretical concept, something other people do but not you. It's fine, you say. I'll handle it. But behind that steady voice, the body is screaming. The shoulders ache. The mind races. The heart quietly wonders if anyone would even show up if you did ask. That's what makes this psychology so painful. Even if you wanted to ask, part of you doesn't believe the help would come. There's also a layer of deep shame that psychologists have observed in people who can't ask for help. Something called learned helplessness, but inverted. Instead of believing nothing you do matters, you believe everything depends entirely on you. It's the burden of perceived omnipotence. You're not allowed to falter because too many people rely on your steadiness. And sometimes that's real. Sometimes people genuinely depend on you. But often it's a story you've told yourself so many times it feels like fact, that you're the glue, that if you admit struggle, everything falls apart, so you stay silent, you keep lifting, you keep pretending. But it's not resilience, it's fear. It's the human mind saying, if I let go, I'll disappear. So if you've ever felt unable to ask for help, like the words just won't come out even when you're drowning, know that it's not pride. It's protection. You're not cold or arrogant. You're afraid. You're afraid of rejection. You're afraid of being too much. You're afraid of confirming what a small voice inside has always whispered, that you're on your own. Because asking for help isn't really about the favour. It's about trust. It's about believing that your needs won't be met with annoyance, dismissal, or silence. It's about letting someone see you without armour. And for people who've been the strong one their whole lives, that level of exposure feels unbearable. When you were a kid, maybe asking meant being told to toughen up. When you're an adult, it means risking the image you've spent years building. It's less about competence and more about safety, less about what others will do and more about what you'll feel if they don't show up. That's the subtle shift most people don't talk about, and yet it explains everything about why asking feels impossible. Because maybe you've stopped trying to be supported by others and started trying to survive without anyone noticing how heavy it's gotten. But even in that survival mode, there's an echo, a quiet voice that says, I wish someone just knew. That's the paradox of self-reliance. You can be capable and still crave care. You can be strong and still need softness. And that's okay. That's human. Because refusing to ask for help doesn't mean you're powerful. It means you've learned that power is the only currency you're allowed to use. It's the loneliest kind of strength, invisible but crushing. But here's where it gets even more layered. The deeper wound most people never realise. When someone never asks for help, they're not just protecting themselves from others, they're protecting others from themselves. They're saying, I don't want to be a burden. And that belief, that their needs are inherently too much, is one of the most devastating lies a person can carry. Because somewhere along the road, we all internalize messages about worthiness. And for many, the message was this: you're valuable when you're useful. You're lovable when you're low maintenance. You're safe when you're small. What starts to matter more isn't accomplishment, it's approval. Did I make it through without needing anyone? Did I prove I'm not too much? Did I earn my place by being easy? For many people, not asking for help becomes less about capability and more about permission. It's not that they don't know how, it's that they don't feel allowed. Maybe their help was rejected before. Maybe their vulnerability was weaponized. Maybe someone once made them feel guilty for struggling, and that's something our culture rarely discusses. We praise independence, but we punish need. We celebrate self-reliance, and then wonder why people suffer in silence. In psychology, this is connected to something called relational trauma. When the people who were supposed to care for you didn't, or did so conditionally, you learn that connection is conditional. So when someone refuses help repeatedly, it's not stubbornness, it's self-preservation. They're no longer risking the kind of rejection that rewires your nervous system. They've replaced it with something predictable, themselves. But still there's an ache that pulses beneath that isolation. Because while some people truly feel fine handling everything alone, others quietly wish someone would insist. They wish they didn't have to be so strong. They wish someone else would take the weight just once without them having to beg for it. And that tension between wanting support and being unable to ask for it is one of the most universal contradictions there is. We all carry it, the longing to be helped without having to explain why, the desire to be seen without performing collapse. It's that aching space between independence and intimacy. Psychologically, this is tied to something called disorganized attachment. When people have learned that closeness is unpredictable, sometimes safe, sometimes painful, they oscillate between wanting connection and fearing it. But even avoidant people carry a quiet hope that someone will break through the walls they've built. So refusing help becomes a subtle test, not one you're aware of, but one your nervous system runs constantly. Will they notice I'm struggling? Will they offer without me asking? Will they stay when I'm not easy? And even if you tell yourself it doesn't matter, a part of you still watches. That's not weakness, that's wiring. Because no matter how independent or self-sufficient we become, we never outgrow the need for someone to care. We just get better at pretending we don't. There's also a heartbreaking irony in how people who never ask for help relate to others. They're often the first ones to show up when someone else needs support. They'll drop everything. They'll listen for hours. They'll offer resources, time, energy without hesitation. But when the roles reverse, they freeze. They can give endlessly, but receiving feels like drowning. That's because for many, helping others is safe. It keeps you in control. It reinforces your role. But being helped means surrendering control, admitting limitation, becoming the vulnerable one. And for someone whose identity is built on being the strong one, that role reversal feels like annihilation. That's why many people prefer to suffer than to ask. It's not about the task itself, it's about what asking would mean. It would mean you're human, flawed, finite. And for people who've spent their lives being the exception, that truth is terrifying. When you treat self-reliance like a badge of honor, you don't realize it can also become a cage. It starts as strength and ends as isolation. Because not every kind of independence is freedom. Some of it is just fear with better branding. Still, there's a truth worth sitting with. Even the most self-sufficient souls still deserve to be cared for. Not because they're incapable, but because care isn't earned through weakness. It's given because you matter. The ones who never ask for help are often the same people who've held everyone else together. They're the ones who show up in crisis, the ones who give advice, lend money, offer couches, listen at midnight. And sometimes those people forget that the giving isn't supposed to be one-directional, that it's okay to need someone back, that you don't have to earn rest by collapsing first. Because even the steadiest hands still shake sometimes, even the calmest voices still crack. There's nothing wrong with needing that acknowledged. There's nothing weak about wanting someone to say, "Let me carry this for you." If you've ever felt that weight, the kind that makes your chest tight and your thoughts spiral, the kind that whispers you're failing because you can't do it all, that's your body reminding you that you were never meant to be alone. It's reminding you that you're human, and that's the whole point. You're not here to be indestructible, you're here to be real. So maybe the psychology of people who never ask for help isn't about strength at all. Maybe it's about fear, the fear that if you let someone in, they'll confirm what you've always suspected, that you're too much or not enough, or somehow unworthy of the same care you give so freely to others. And yet, even in that fear, there's a longing. Because one message can still shift everything, one person saying, "I see you struggling and I'm here." We underestimate how much that means to someone who's been holding it all together alone. To them, it's not about grand gestures, it's about being seen. It's about someone noticing the exhaustion they've been hiding, the weight they've been carrying, the smile that doesn't quite reach their eyes anymore. And maybe that's the real psychology of it all, that deep down, none of us truly want to be invincible. We just want to know that needing help won't make us unlovable. Some people want to be rescued, others just want permission to rest. Some people want answers, others just want presence. And that's okay. There's no right way to carry your humanity. So if asking for help feels impossible, if you've spent years being the strong one, if you've learned to survive without leaning on anyone, maybe that's not something to celebrate, maybe it's something to grieve. Because what you're really carrying isn't just tusks and problems, you're carrying the belief that you have to. But at the same time, let yourself soften. If you miss the feeling of being cared for, it's okay to feel that too. Missing support doesn't mean you've regressed. It means you're remembering what connection felt like before the world taught you to stand alone. And perhaps that's the greatest gift you can give yourself. To remember the version of you who once reached out freely, who believed the help would come, who didn't have to earn every bit of care. Because that version is still somewhere inside you, waiting not for rescue but for acknowledgement, waiting for you to whisper, "I don't have to do this alone." That's the kind of strength that doesn't isolate. That's the kind that connects. So, if you've been carrying too much for too long, don't feel guilty for wanting someone to notice. It's not weakness, it's honesty. It's the mind learning that survival isn't the same as living. And yet in the solitude, if someone reaches out, let them. Let them ask if you're okay. Let them remind you that your struggles don't make you a burden. Because you don't. Even when you refuse to ask. Even when you handle it all alone, especially then. Because maybe that's the most beautiful thing about being human. Learning that asking for help isn't giving up. Sometimes it's just letting someone love you. A moment of trust. A deep breath. You don't have to prove you're strong. You already are, not because you never need help, but because you've survived everything so far, often without it. And that's worth honouring quietly or not every single day. If you made it all the way through this video, I want you to do something for me. Leave a comment saying, "I don't have to suffer in silence anymore." Not because I need the engagement, but because sometimes typing those words out loud is the first step toward believing them. And maybe someone else who needs to hear it will see your comment and realise they're not alone either. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for giving space to these uncomfortable truths. If this resonated with you, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. It genuinely helps support this kind of work and allows me to keep creating videos that hopefully make you feel a little more seen, a little more understood. Take care of yourself. You deserve it.